Let me just first thank you for having me again. And I say again because I was here last year. And I spoke about de-extinction. So that's the business of bringing back extinct species, reviving extinct species. And I found that this audience was remarkably liberal thinking about the notion. So I'm very happy to be back and talk about technologies more generally. And I've given it the title so that nobody precisely knows what to expect, because otherwise I would have an empty room probably. A normative taxonomy. What I'm going to try to do is to classify different uses of technologies in environmental policy in terms of good or bad. Are they acceptable or not acceptable, ethically and legally? See what I... Yep. Yeah. So what I'm talking about today forms part of a wider fascination I have. The word Anthropocene was coined earlier this morning by the keynote speaker, so don't need to explain what it means. And normally what happens, so I'm preparing you, I'm taking away some of the questions to save some time. Normally what happens in the discussion is that the audience will say, well, hang on, what you're proposing here to redesign planet Earth, both living and non-living, that's an example of hubris, sort of human arrogance. And I find that strange because we find it perfectly acceptable that what we have done so far, sort of ill-considered random engineering of our climate, etc., we find that totally acceptable. And the second problem or paradox, and that's what I'm going to talk and focus on today, is that I've also done some work on human enhancement, so making people more intelligent and athletic and stuff like that. There's loads of literature and sort of there's limits to what we're allowed to do. We have a certain hardcore, do not go beyond this, and that's human dignity. So we're going to ask ourselves, how far can we go in redesigning our climate, for example, introducing new species? There's no hard line. I haven't found anything in environmental law that says that's a no-go area. So that makes it necessary for us to start thinking about these normative questions, these ethical questions. So, a final part of introduction is this is the premise against which you have to appreciate my presentation. I think future environmental policy, which actually I think we've already started this future environmental policy 2.0, will rule out individual behavior, so it will make it impossible. That compromises collective environmental human rights, and that's possible through techno-regulation. I'll explain what it is in a second. And it will regulate and occasionally even mandate, so make obligatory, the deployment of what I call environmental enhancement technologies. So in parallel with human enhancement, you can think of environmental enhancements that intentionally alter environments to secure collective human rights. That's my premise. So what are regulatory technologies? Well, they're technologies, obviously, and they amount to extremely efficient means of regulating behavior, and they contain a promise of perfect compliance. And we found it out when we were babies playing with this. I don't know whether you have them here too in South Africa, but it's really hard to get the square peg through the round hole. And it works much better than any mother saying to a child, do not put the square peg in the round hole, right? Because, so technologies actually can secure full compliance. And if you start looking at the world that way, you'll see it all around you. Speed bumps are more effective than science slowdown here. And there's millions of these examples. So technologies regulate. They regulate behavior. And they do it in a way that leaves no room for non-compliance. Now, the premise is that the closer we are to environmental Armageddon, the more tempting it will be for regulators to deploy these kind of technologies. What's environmental enhancement? Well, if you Google the term, you won't find it. Maybe one or two publications from me. But I thought it is odd that we keep talking about human enhancement. So instead of making people better, making better people, that's human enhancement. And what I see now is, for example, the genetic manipulation of the malaria mosquito in order to stop its spread is, I'm not sure what it is. It's not environmental protection. And I would call it environmental enhancement. It's something completely new. The gentleman over there is a guy called George Church, and he is in the business of making new animals, and he's also very advanced in bringing back the woolly mammoth. And he's a bright guy from Harvard. And so enhancement gives rise to status quo post. So you have the status quo ante, and the status quo post, terms from the law of warfare. So the situation after the fight, something new. Now there's a certain conceptual logic behind techno-regulation and environmental enhancement. Techno-regulation is when I talk about techno-regulation, I talk about technologies that target your behavior, right? The baby cannot put the square peg, etc. Environmental enhancement, we've given up on changing your behavior. We're changing the environment in which you operate. And if I had to give a very simple introduction to what the Anthropocene is, I would say, well, it's the situation in which three phenomena that previously were seen as distinct, humans, nature, and technologies, they're merging. So in the Anthropocene, nature has become human, and humans are very close to succumbing to nature, which is again is a strange paradox. And technologies are also increasingly changing humans. We're making humans more intelligent, we immunize them, what have you. So these three phenomena are merging into something in a singularity. And the bad news behind the Anthropocene is this box you can see as the safe operating space for humankind. That the 9 sort of basic conditions that need to be fulfilled for humans to be able to live on this planet. And if through this interaction we move outside that safety box, we die. And these 9 planetary boundaries, 4 of them have been overstepped. So if I were more clever with PowerPoint, I would have sort of have it moving slowly, gradually out of that safe box. So conceptually, if we accept that technologies really determine the nature that we see around us, it's not so strange to start thinking about deploying them in a sort of intelligent way, rather than in a random, irresponsible way. Apart from a conceptual logic, there's also compelling logic in the sense that this is a graph that I pinched from Ari's teaching materials. Here we are when we talk about the rate of extinction, nothing much going on until the Industrial Revolution. And now we see something that should concern even the most optimistic of us. And many of us say that we're actually witnessing 6 mass extinction. And the mass extinctions, the more intelligent creatures go first. Bacteria are okay. So we're on a spot of trouble. Because we're on a spot of trouble, that means that normally regulators, there's 2 things that regulators are held to account for. One, what they do should be effective. And second, what they do should be legitimate. It should be the right way to do it in the right way. In cases of crisis or impending crisis, we are happy to compromise on legitimacy. You see that in states of exceptions, in states of emergency, terrorism, all sorts of fundamental rights are being sacrificed for the sake of effectiveness. For me, it's fairly obvious that we will see measures in the sphere of the environment that will compromise some of your rights, privacy rights and what have you, in order to escape this Armageddon. So what's wrong with techno-regulation? Why should lawyers be thinking about it? Well, that answer is not so hard because humans have rights. In fact, humans have intrinsic rights. I have a right as a human. If you strip me of everything, I still have human dignity, according to international conventions, etc. So anything we do, we must sort of measure against these rights. So if I start monitoring your use of the car or whatever, then I'm bumping into privacy rights. And there's all sorts of technologies I could use to make sure that you change your behavior, but I can't because that would be breaching your human rights. And the problem is this, and this is a very famous constitutional law, is that the problem with techno-regulation is you don't comply with it because you want to, you comply with it just like the baby because there's no alternative. And that is the very essence of what we regard under human dignity. At least one conception of human dignity is that you do what you do because you want to do it. You do the right thing for the right reason. So I can make I can make stuff that makes you behave in the right way. Your car won't start if you've been drinking. That already exists in Europe. Volvos won't start, they have an alcohol lock, etc. Constitutional Court has said, can't do that. Breach of human dignity. Yeah, I'm all for the driverless car as well for that reason. Yeah. So what's wrong with human enhancement, engineering Earth 3.0? Perversely, legally, that's not so hard, that's not so easy to answer because there's no golden rule. In as far as I know, there's nothing in environmental law that says whatever you want to do with the environment, you can't do that. Yes, of course, if a species is listed, we can't kill it. But we can't kill it because we decided it should be listed, right? Human dignity is not, the protection of human dignity is not dependent on me having a good day. The environment is different. We can do basically whatever we want. So anything that's not been specifically regulated is free. If I want to change the color of the trees in order to reflect more sunlight, turn them into white, all that is possible, I can, because it's not prohibited. I can't sell a sandwich panda bear because it's protected. I can sell a sandwich insects. There's no real difference between an insect and a panda bear, other than that I've decided the panda bear is fluffy and nice. So there's really, even though it gives us sort of uncomfortable feeling to start thinking about us as masters of the universe, re-engineering the planet, there's not much legally that will stop us, other than risk, but the risk of doing nothing is probably even more serious. So if it is true that we're going to see more technologies being used in the environment, and we're already seeing it, we are changing insects to protect ourselves. We are bringing species, and the IUCN has developed guidelines which species to bring back for what reason. It is happening. So if lawyers want to make sense of this and want to say at some stage, say, you can't do that, but you can do that. So how can we solve that problem? And my answer, of course, I'm not sure, but I'm sure we should start thinking about it. And the first rough taxonomy would say, if you look at what's happened since the environment was invented by lawyers in 72, before that we didn't have a concept. Well, in 72 we started articulating the environment as something legally interesting. What happened since is, well, first we have technologies that operationalize statutory standards, like you want to have clean air, then put a filter on your car. The technology is ancillary, it's not exciting, it's just implementing legal standard, and it targets us, humans. What we begin to see is we move towards a system of panopticon that is an all-encompassing surveillance system. Last year there was a gentleman that gave a paper in the plenary session about protecting the rhinoceros by installing some sort of surveillance, ICT surveillance system. That's an example of what's going to happen, and they're working more and more on it. The third stage, which we are beginning to see, that's more exciting, is that the standard and the technology are one and the same thing. The speed bump is the norm. So you can make boats that emit a sound if they move and they scare away dolphins. So you don't have a norm, the design is the norm. There's more to say about that, but we don't have the time. And then the fourth generation, the final, what we're seeing now, is we actually changing animals and plants. Mostly to serve our interests, sometimes for ecological reasons. So against this background, what can we say about these technologies, about good and bad? Is it possible to say, don't do that? Or maybe we should also ask ourselves, in what circumstances should we say, you have to do that? We had news in Europe, 70% of insects have died in a nature reserve within the time span of 20 years. That's more serious news than perhaps anything we're discussing today. Suppose that the bumblebees want to go, which is at the heart of our food chain. Should we bring the bumblebee, or the honeybee I should say, should I bring back the honeybee to secure food supply and ecological integrity? And maybe there's a case to say yes. I pretend I haven't seen that, but I'll move on. I need to go back, it doesn't want it. Yeah. So these are some questions we can ask ourselves. Does it matter what kind of enhancement we are talking about, for legally or ethically? And I've pinched these questions from the debate of human enhancement, and some of them are fairly easily transferable to the environment. So enhancement versus improvement. Suppose that a salmon cannot survive in a river because industrial cooling water has raised water temperatures. We can either say, well, we improve the quality of the river. Improvement is a legal term. By bringing it back to previous temperatures and we just close down those industrial establishments. Or enhancement says, you know what, we will change the salmon genetically so that it can survive in warmer water. We have done that. We have genetically manipulated salmon so that they produce their own cooling system, so that they can live far up north. Biological versus non-biological. The living environment versus the non-living environment. A species in the climate. Do we feel different about those kind of things? Genetic enhancement, improving traits. So suppose that we can meddle around with the rhinoceros gene so that its horn is no longer it's no longer interesting for poachers. Suppose that we can do that. Is that different from painting it in a color that makes it useless? Enhancement benefiting nature versus enhancement benefiting humans. Enhancement impacting only on those deciding. So I decide to do something and it affects me, but not future generations. Is that different from enhancement that will affect others too? I'm going in high speed here. This is a bit complex. We can enhance for positional benefits or for absolute benefit. Now, positional benefit, this comes from law and economics. This is a benefit that I have because someone else doesn't have it. So the athlete that takes drugs to run faster is looking for a positional benefit, but that advantage will be lost if everybody takes the drug. Even though everybody starts running faster, the benefit will be lost. Absolute goods is that the benefit is for me, but if others have the benefit too, the benefit still is there for me. And you can find examples in environmental law where certain benefits are universal and others will be quite sort of territorial. And you find it in the climate change debate at the moment as well. And then reversible versus irreversible change. I would suspect that makes a difference for most of us. I'm almost at the end. So what this very, very quick and dirty taxonomy shows is that we are likely to see in the very near future different legal positions, depending on what kind of enhancement strategy we're talking about. It may range from a prohibition all the way through to a mandate. We might find situations in which states are actually obliged to do something that amounts to environmental enhancement because it is of prime concern for human rights or ecological integrity. Won't go through these. These are the 9 planetary boundaries I talked about, and there are some pretty spectacular examples of what we're doing right now to save our skin for a few more decades. That's it. Thank you.